Hey, this is Joel with American Giants. I thought for this week's episode we'd do an episode on the Midas Muffler Man. Interestingly enough, one of the very few that did in fact hold a muffler when they were made in the 1960s. The only other giants, I think there was one in New York I've seen a picture of, and then of course the Ken's Muffler in Dallas area, they ordered their snurs, and of course the original, which was a standard Muffler Man with mufflers. But other than that, very few muffler men actually hold mufflers. The Midas Men did, however, and they also had a crown on their heads, and they were ordered for the Midas Muffler Company. It was not a huge program. It was probably a short-lived program, but it was one of the companies that International Fiberglass worked with. In April 1956, Midas, an acronym of Muffler Installation Dealers Association, was established by Nate H. Sherman, and the first Midas muffler opened that year in Macon, Georgia. The chain was originally known as Midas Muffler, as they specialized in replacement mufflers. In recent years, they have marketed themselves as auto service experts. The Midas name is derived from King Midas and his golden touch. Hence the slogan, "Trust the Midas Touch." Around 1964, Steve Dashew, owner of International Fiberglass, traveled to a trade show at a hotel on Wilshire Boulevard. The show was a franchise convention, and while he was there, he met some of the top officials from Midas. At the time, Steve was pushing his giants with as many companies as would listen. The desire was to start programs with these companies, and International Fiberglass would produce hundreds of fiberglass figures for display at all the locations in the franchise. The angle Steve used is he would get permission from top officials to make a handful of muffler men bearing the company's logo with some small alterations to fit the brand. Once permission was given, he would produce a short run on the figures at the company's expense, hoping the franchise would latch on and order hundreds more. During his meeting with Midas, Steve got permission to create about 5 muffler men, and the company would test them at their stores. Once back at International Fiberglass, Steve got right to work, taking a standard muffler man body, making a simple crown and a muffler, and slapping the Midas logo on his shirt and crown. These giants were distributed to a few Midas shops around the country, and sadly for Steve, that was the end of it. Midas never signed the contract for a large order, leaving just a few rare Midas men left in existence today. The giants were known as King Midas, and they came with that crown and then a muffler. And other than lettering on their chest and sometimes on the muffler, they really weren't that unique. However, today there's very, very few of these Midas men left. I don't think it was a terribly widespread program. There was probably a handful of shops that actually had the Muffler Man, and most of them did not. Today there's probably only 2 or 3 of these original crowns that are left. As far as locations go, there was a location on the East Coast that ordered basically what was a Midas Man Muffler Man, but it wasn't for a Midas shop. So he had different colors, but everything else was the same. He had the muffler and the crown. That giant in Norfolk is still there today.
The Mother Road, Route 66. We travel her for the nostalgia, the neon, and the memories. We also travel her for the Muffler Men. The giants dating back to the 1960s that still dot the American landscape. Many of these well-known icons still survive, towering over gas stations and still advertise burgers and hot dogs. The American Giants Museum. Visit one of the largest concentrations of these giants, dig deep into their history, and learn the story of the American fiberglass advertising figure. Visit AmericanGiantsMuseum.com to learn more and to support this new roadside attraction.
There was one in Whittier, California, that's very famous, shows up in quite of old vintage slides and pictures of the area, and it was actually still on a pole above the shop not that long ago. Probably 10 or 15 years ago, it was still there. Today you can find that giant in Unger, West Virginia. New Orleans was also another location that had a Midas Man, and I've heard rumors there was actually two of them there at two different locations. One for sure, but there are rumblings of another Muffler Man or Midas Man that was there, and we have multiple pictures from that area. Some show a giant on the ground in front of a building without the crown, and others show a giant on the roof of a building with the crown. So that makes me think that there might have been two different giants. From research, it's looking at like there were two giants, and we know that the second Muffler Man has been used in Mardi Gras floats for 20 plus years in the area, and this pictures of this guy occasionally show up on different floats and in the buildings where they do Mardi Gras. So we know that there are two Muffler Men that originated from New Orleans. We've got some great vintage photographs of at least one of them on two different angles in New Orleans. Great shots with tons of vintage sides going down the road, and there is the big Midas Muffler Man. Now eventually this Muffler Man was moved up to Metairie, and he stood for a business there for many years. He was kind of well known in the area, still had his crown, missing his muffler at this point in time. And he stood there until Hurricane Isaac, and that tore him down and took him apart, and he was in pieces in the parking lot of that business until he was taken to a storage unit and put in storage. And the plan was all along to return him to the shop and repair him. That just never happened. And eventually we were contacted at American Giants, and they asked if we could help find a buyer, because that's one of the things we do. You have a Muffler Man, we'll put it on our website and help you find a buyer for it. And so we did that, and it was during COVID. It was a dry time. I was a little confused because sometimes there's so much demand, and then this particular time when we put him up, there was just nothing. Nobody wanted to buy him. And she eventually called me and said, I need him out of the storage unit like now. And I said, well, this is what I can offer. I'll give you this much if you want to take my offer, and we'll come get him next week. And that's what we did. She accepted the offer. Michael jumped in his truck and headed down there and pulled the guy out of the storage unit.
Okay, so we're here in New Orleans. Time to pick up another Muffler Man for American Giants. This guy came down in Hurricane Isaac, been sitting in storage for a while. We're going to take it back to the shop and hopefully get it restored. We have him loaded. It's wet and rainy.
Michael had actually visited him at nighttime way back in like 2012 and photographed him, but I never saw him before. So it wasn't until he got to at the time, the American Giants restoration shop, now Re-Giant, that I saw him for the first time. And we still have him in storage, still have his original crown, and the hope is to put him up at the American Giants Museum. I've spent a lot of time looking for vintage shots of Midas Men. Unfortunately, they're a very elusive giant to find online. There's not many pictures of them, which makes me think they were not heavily used with Midas. I've contacted Midas and asked them for historical information and then maybe something out of their archives of the program that they did. And they wrote me back and they sent me a link to my own website. So I took it that there's really not a whole lot of information out there. So it's been a little difficult to get the history.
I met the key guys from Midas at a franchise. How do I describe it? It was like a trade show for people that were in the franchise business. Midas was already well established, but I met one of the principals. Often what would happen is we would get permission to use the symbol, and we would do a version of it for them. And if we thought there was enough potential, we wouldn't charge them for the tooling. We would just sell it ourselves directly to them.
But I have found some really cool slides over the years of workers at Midas. It just reminds me of that whole 1960s era. And it's been, I don't know, they're so rare. I'm really thankful now that American Giants has a Midas Man. It wasn't really my intent to ever get one, but now that I've got them, I'm really glad I have them. And so that is what we know about the International Fiberglass Midas style Muffler Man.